Welcome back to Women Writers in Chinese History. In the following videos, we're going to talk about a prominent image in Chinese poetry, the neglected or abandoned woman, and the question of authorship when it comes to the traditional attribution of some poems written in the voice of an abandoned woman to female writers. This video provides a general introduction to this topic. In our last lecture, we have discussed popular legends about those femme fatale blamed for the fall of dynasties, such as Daji and Baosi. We have said that those stories are likely fictional, but have been traditionally taken as true due to biased gender views. The situation we'll see here is both similar and different. Here, we once again see the case of women's voices and images being invented and represented by male writers. However, instead of serving as the objects for moral critique, the women in this case are presented as tragic figures and objects of pity. In this sense, they embody what I shall call the lyrical or sentimental stereotype in Chinese poetry. To discuss this lyrical stereotype, we first need to note that, unlike other ancient traditions such as ancient Greece, which produced long epic poems, poetic writings in traditional China are predominantly short lyrical pieces. In other words, they express individual emotions and are meant to touch their readers emotionally. In the Chinese language, this aesthetic idea is referred to as shuqing. This characteristic is already clear in the early poetry anthology at the fountainhead of Chinese literature, Shi Jing, the book of poetry, or sometimes also translated as the Book of Odes, which can be dated to the Western Zhou period around 10th century BCE. For women's writing, the lyrical ideal meant that poetic beauty strongly linked with femininity. Women's vulnerability as the subordinate gender in the traditional setting rendered their image more or less tragic from a poetic perspective. Moreover, since women were restricted to the domestic sphere and defined by family relations, female characters were also tended to be perceived by male poets as sentimental, emotional beings. And what type of female image is the most tragic and sentimental? Other than women who die young, and we'll see those cases, the tragic heroine is usually an abandoned woman or qifu, that is, abandoned or neglected by her lover, by her husband, or in the case of a consort or palace lady, by the king or the emperor. Considering how much power a husband had over his wife or concubine, these scenarios in which a woman was neglected or jilted in a relationship was, of course, not uncommon. And unsurprisingly, there are a number of well-known stories of this kind, some reported as history, some written as fictional stories. Interestingly, these accounts, whether as history or fiction, often include one or more poems supposedly written by the woman on her sad state after being abandoned. To a certain extent, the aesthetic effect of those poems in the story is like those emotive numbers sung by characters at critical junctures in a musical. However, from a historical standpoint for understanding women's literature, this literary tradition raised the question as to how many of those poems delivered in a woman's voice were actually written by a woman, especially when they were attributed to a specific historical figure. This question is confounded by the long cultural tradition of accepting those poems as real. As the authors of Red Brush state, to this day, in cases of questionable authorship, one often encounters the argument that only a woman could have written so movingly of a woman's experiences. These poems not only shape the image of particular historical figures, but also set up expectations for how a woman is supposed to feel and how she's supposed to express herself. These models for representing women's feelings, however, might have come from male poets. Then, what might have been the psychological motives for male poets to impersonate female writing? One reason could be an analogy between women's subordinate position to men and these male scholars' subordinate position to the emperor, especially when they were not appreciated and employed as officials. To quote from the Red Brush, "In the sad fate of these women, these men saw an analogy to their own lack of recognition by the Son of Heaven. Many such poems were written entirely in the voice of a woman who expresses her undying love of her man. This became a way for male poets, who were all for the most part officials or aspiring officials, to emphasize their own total and limitless devotion to the emperor." However, I believe that there is yet another reason for the image of the abandoned woman to become such a popular poetic motif. On the philosophical or existential level, Chinese poetry is often concerned with the theme of human mortality and impermanence, that is, nothing stays forever, including one's youth, and eventually one's life. This idea is known in the Chinese language as wuchang. The vulnerable and tragic image of the abandoned woman provides a figure for this fundamental sadness within human existence itself. For this aesthetic implication, her image is often associated with that of fading flowers at the end of spring, an image that manifests the frailty of youth, beauty, love, and human life itself. We'll see this association again and again in Chinese poetry. Another context to keep in mind is that sentimental poems written in the voice of women were often performed by female musicians in the Imperial Palace Music Bureau, 乐府, or in pleasure quarters. We'll see more of these examples later. Now, we may just briefly comment that this performative context is characterized by the rather circular process of men writing in the voice of women and then letting women perform those emotions back for their aesthetic consumption. After this introduction, let's look at some notable cases of women's poems possibly fabricated by men. One place where one may find many abandoned women is the Imperial Palace, since there were so many women living there, in the number of hundreds and even thousands, serving the same husband, the emperor. As we have discussed, some women might never get the chance to meet the emperor. And even for those women who got to have a relationship with the emperor and even born him children, they could easily lose his favors. If the emperor really disliked a palace woman, often due to the slander of another palace woman then enjoying his favors, the unfortunate concubine might be sent to the so-called cold palace, which is like the prison cell in the inner palace. The emperor was not supposed to visit this section, and the woman might spend the rest of her life there if the emperor's feelings towards her remained cold. This is the end of this presentation. Please remember to complete the quiz below and watch the next video, which focuses on the case of concubine Ban, a virtuous woman slandered by her rival in the inner palace.